Welcome to the WeHa.com Roundtable. I'm John Lyons, joined as always by the managing editor of WeHa.com, Ronnie Newton. We welcome our viewers watching locally on WHCI TV, Channel 5, and around the region on WeHa.com, Neighbors and Friends, and other Facebook live streams. Tonight we welcome 3 members of our West Hartford Board of Education, including the current board chair, Lorna Thomas-Farquharson, Clare Neseralla, and Ethan Goldman, who are both serving their first terms on the Board of Ed. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having
And
us.
Laura, I'm sorry, I stumbled a little bit on your last name, which I always do. I apologize. I've known you a long time, but I always struggle with it. So,
That's all right. I've
anyway.
heard many pronunciations over the years. It's all right.
So let's start. Ethan, I'm going to start with you. We want to go through some general topics and talk about what you guys are working on. But I mentioned at the open, 2 of you are on early in your first term. Ethan, coming in, what was your expectation? What's it been like? Any surprises? Talk about your experience.
Didn't really have any expectations because it happened relatively fast in terms of getting appointed. I think although I don't always agree with where the majority's going, the coordination, the conversations, I think have been positive, and it's important to keep talking. So that part's been very pleasing. I mean, to be able to talk to everybody and know that your voice can be heard out. So.
And Claire, what were your expectations and what have you experienced so far?
Well, as a teacher in the district, I followed the Board of Ed, so I kind of knew how it was all set up. I didn't expect the amount of meetings. So, we're liaisons to multiple boards. So there's a lot of other meetings beyond the actual Board of Ed. So when you first look at it and say there's 2 meetings a month, it's much more than 2 meetings. So that time commitment's been a struggle, but it's getting easier. The budget month is really a lot of meetings. So, but I've enjoyed it. It's been great to get to know the other colleagues and to represent the schools.
And then Lorna, you're 3 or 4 months into your first term as chair. Have there been any surprises as chair? Any challenges? What have you experienced as the obviously you're on. You've been a member for years, but your first time as chair.
Surprises, no. Just, if anything, pleasantly surprised. And pleasantly surprised in that with our role as board members, we are individuals, but collectively we represent the board, we represent the district. And with all of the changes that have been going on over the past, I can't say months, I would say years, it's even all the more important for us to work collectively as a team. And so, yes, I have the role as board chair, but most importantly, I'm a team member, a member of the Board of Education. And as Ethan made reference to, and Claire as well, it's important for us to be able to communicate and to have a level of civil engagement, and that's important. So for that reason, they help make the role all the more smoother moving as we are trying to execute things.
So far, so good.
So far, so good.
Okay, all right.
And how many years have you been on the board?
I'm in my second term, so I've already completed one full term of 4 years, and I'm now in the first year of the second term.
Terrific. So I think let's start kind of at 50,000 feet, and then we'll drill down on some of the issues. I think maybe Ethan and Claire maybe had some expectation because over the last year, Board of Ed meetings have really taken on a kind of a new life of their own, particularly with respect to public input. And unfortunately, very often, some of the public input might be guided by external media. What's it been like, and I asked the 2 of you first because you kind of came into it when it's going full-fledged. Some of these public comment sections, things like that. And Ethan, I'll start with you. Talk about that. What's your feelings? What's your reaction to that?
We've really been on different issues like the team names and things like that, which I don't, so far it's been fine. I would like more, one of my disappointments with the team names and then with the diversity issue that came up is just, I think transparency is good. And one of the comments that was made by people who favored changing the names, which I was against, but one of their comments was it'll bring us together as a community. And this is 20/20 hindsight.
Right.
Looking back, I think we rushed through the process. It would have been good to get everybody's statements out there, because I didn't necessarily disagree with the people, I didn't necessarily agree with the people who wanted to change the name, but I found it educational and helpful to see why they wanted to change. Just like I also found it good to hear people had different perspectives sometimes of why they wanted to keep the name. And unfortunately, doing 2 months, and again, it's 20/20 hindsight, but doing 2 months over the Christmas holidays, I don't think gave us a chance to get all that information out there.
It was interesting, and this, just to be clear, this interview is looking to be forward-looking, but I'm glad you brought this up, because there was a really interesting exchange between you and the former chair, Deb Poland, when you put forward a motion, and I hope I'm okay saying this, Ethan, I'm saying this respectfully. It was interesting to see, because you're learning the role. I led off the interview by saying you're a first-termer. You've only been in the role 4 months now.
Yep.
And so you put forward a motion, and it was interesting to see you and Deb kind of work through the motion, and I felt she was trying to guide you, and I felt you listened really well on how to put the motion through in terms of considering a delay or not a delay. I just thought that was, I don't know if you have a comment to that, but I thought it was a
No, I
really
appreciate the
interesting
fact she was
exchange.
willing to listen and we worked something out. It wasn't what I originally wanted,
Right,
but it was workable. Unfortunately, it didn't work for everybody.
right.
But, no, particularly because I am in the minority party,
Right.
the only way that I'm effective is if I'm working with the other members. And hopefully I am, and, I know Gail has the same feeling. So, but, we're a democracy. We're a representative government. We have to work together. At least that's my belief.
Yeah, no, I think,
Hopefully I'm doing it.
I think, no, that's why I appreciated that moment, and I know it was a little bit of a learning curve for you, but I was in the room when it happened. It was fun for me to watch, because I was watching somebody learn, take steps toward learning how to be a great Board of Ed representative regardless of party. That was my opinion.
Yeah, well, then I got an email saying, why don't you get Robert's Rules of Order, which I did. And the print's incredibly small.
Good luck with that.
I'm trying.
So, Claire, how about you, specifically to, some of the public comments, because
Right.
sometimes the comments are quite lively and outspoken.
Yeah, well, I'm very thankful that people do come forward. I don't think it's comfortable for everyone, and I have spoken at town council and Board of Ed meetings before as a resident. So it's not the easiest thing for some people, so I give credit to the people who have come. I think sometimes there's a lack of civility and some things that you wouldn't say to your own family members that I think people shouldn't put in writing and shouldn't say publicly. Just they're unkind things. So I wish there was less of that. But in general, when we talked about voting in January, Dr. Harris was against that, and I agreed with her, and it was a 6-to-1 vote to vote in February. So I felt that 2 months was a good amount of time. We got a lot of letters. Some towards the end started coming in large droves and had the same phrasing. So people were using the same talking points almost verbatim, and 25 letters in one day. So it got towards the end, a whole lot of comments. But those people who write, they don't choose to do an op-ed. They don't choose to come publicly and speak at the Board of Ed. We're not allowed to release their names. We can't just publish letters that are sent to the board. There are places people can publicly put their name out, but those letters are for us to help weigh the issues.
Actually, I believe if somebody has written to you in your capacity as a public official, it's subject to the Freedom of Information Act.
Yes, well, it is, but as far as us publishing the letters or putting them out, anyone can access them.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is, all that we got to read wasn't for us to publish publicly.
Okay, I see.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's not, there are public ways you can put your information out, and there's public rights to the information that was given to us, but it's not for us to publish those letters ourselves.
Could I add one follow-up?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would have been interesting, and again, the rules are the rules, but it would have been interesting to have had, because this was a hot button issue, or to have a way that people could put it publicly. I think that would have taken away some of the people, to Claire's point, who maybe were not as constructive as they probably could be, if they know it's going to be public. It doesn't mean you have to put it out publicly, But there were people with a lot of good points who spent a lot of time. I mean, some of these letters were extremely long. People put a lot of time and effort into it. And I just think it would have been better for the overall community to hear one another and understand that somebody has a different idea, but they're not necessarily doing it for bad reasons.
So Lorna, I guess direct this to you. It sounds like you got a lot of letters. I'm assuming when you say letters, postage stamp or email or
Emails.
both?
Email.
Email, okay, email. So
Some-
predominantly email.
Yep.
And there were one or two that did mail to the main office, and then they would scan the letter and send it to us via
So
email.
do you respond? Is it normal procedure for Board of Ed to try to respond to each and every letter, or how does that, because that sounds like quite the workload.
But worth it. But yes, each letter is responded to.
Okay.
And there are moments when, there are a few here, a few there, and then there are moments, as Claire made reference to, where within the span of 24, 48 hours, you could have in excess of 30 to 50 emails. And so, yes, they are responded to. And I, if I may respond to your question
Yeah.
in terms of just in general with this piece. And this is what I appreciate with us conversing here, and how each of us has our views, our thoughts, and there are moments when we can agree to disagree, but that's what's important. So yes, we have things that we agree to disagree on in terms of the process of voting and in terms of how we went about with that, and that's okay. But that's what's important for us to model the appropriate ways of communicating with each other when we may agree to disagree. And so going to your point about public comments and how public comments are made, we want to hear from the public. We want to hear their thoughts, even if something may be said that may counter what we may be pursuing. Still want to hear it, but it is important for it to be conveyed in a way that is respectful, not only for the process that we are in, but more importantly, the Board of Education meeting, the operative word being education. And we have viewers who are young people who are watching, some that are in the room, and our actions are to impress upon them ways to conduct themselves, not ways of saying, do as I say, not as I do.
And can you talk at all about where the process is now? Does the board still have a role when the new mascots are chosen? I understand that there are separate processes taking place at both high schools. The principals are involved, as well as, I believe, Dr. Morrow as the assistant superintendent. And what role, if any, does the board have once the schools come up with their own choices of new mascots and nicknames?
So first of all, so glad for those that are participating in the process. Again, although with going in this direction, we want for it to be student involved and student led. And so the first piece was opening it up for both schools to come up with names. And each school had hundreds of names that they had suggested. And not only for the current high school students, but those that are in the 8th grade as well. And with that, they were able to narrow it down to about 10 names. Actually, I think that list has already been narrowed down, and with that, there's now another pull-out that the students are to answer to try to come up with the top 5 names. And from there, they'll narrow it down to the top 2, and the young people will vote on that. And then at that point in time, that's when it's intended to come before the board again for our June meeting. For the name will already have been voted on by the students, but we will formally acknowledge and announce the name just to officially recognize the efforts that have been put into it, and for others to know what the new names will be.
Do you know any of the finalists for either school, and can you reveal any of the? I heard one, which I'll let out of the bag here in a minute, from there's a student here, one of our production assistants is a student at Conard, but have you heard any names?
Heard ones here and there. There
Okay.
certainly are some top contenders
Okay.
of the top 10. I'll leave it to you to disclose or to
Well, the only one I'm aware of, I'm sure Ronnie knows more than I do, but the Cardinal is in the running for, Cardinals is in the running for Hall. As a Greenwich High alum, I love the idea of having the Cardinals come home to roost here in West Hartford, so I support that one.
All
So,
right.
Ronnie, have you heard any names?
No, I mean, I actually was on a show, WTIC morning show that Dennis House was hosting a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about mascot ideas, and he had also interviewed Mayor Cantor earlier that week, and some of the ideas that we were throwing around, I don't know where they all came from, but I liked for Conard the Copperheads. And Copperheads are, I think, kind of
indigenous to our area.
They're
You
indigenous
better be
to our
careful if
area.
they go trace the name of Copperheads back.
What's that?
If they trace the historical name of Copperheads, they may be unhappy with it.
Oh.
For snake?
Yeah, no, for Civil War. If you go back to the Civil War, those were the Democratic contingent that wanted to help the South.
Interesting.
Well, I had not heard that. I was thinking of it more as like
No, I understand.
a venomous snake.
But that was the
could be
first thing that
kind
came
of
to mind
fierce.
to me.
That's interesting.
And then
I
I
mean-
thought it would be fun to name the student cheering section the snake pit. Because that, it's like you don't mess with the snake pit, right?
Right.
And then some of the ideas for Hall were the whalers, and, what if somehow we could get Connie the whale moved to Hall? And that would be, a great way to kind of gather that spirit there. Somebody else had suggested the Hall monitors.
Which I think is great.
I thought that was such a great idea, and it's such a good play on words. And the monitor lizard is also kind of a tough guy that could be a good mascot, and hopefully would be not offensive and something that
One of the things I
students
had
could-
hoped would happen, though, was that they would have brought people in from the community who had spoken out strongly against changing the names. Because if you're trying to bring everyone together, get
Right.
them involved.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's happened, because there hasn't really been a lot of information,
Right, right.
which is disappointing.
So,
If I could just say one quick
Yeah,
thing, just
absolutely.
for those that are interested in hearing more of it, certainly listen to our next Board of Ed meeting. We have wonderful student representatives, Andrew and Avery, who give us updates of where things are, and with the current polling, trying to narrow that name down, maybe we'll get a sense of what the top 5 contenders are.
no, we're looking forward to it, because it's an exciting process. Putting the history in the past, it's an exciting process to watch and to for some folks to be a part of. So, all right, you're going through probably one of the most uninteresting yet important part of the years right now, and that is the B word, budget. We're going through the budgeting. I just met with the acting town manager moments ago before the broadcast, and he mentioned that he's expecting, I guess you're going to submit your final budget here in the next few weeks.
Oh, no. No.
Am I sooner? Sooner.
Tuesday.
Okay,
Week from
Tuesday.
tomorrow.
Okay, so sooner, yeah. So give us some highlights. What are some exciting things that you're requesting in the budget? I know there's air conditioning, which I think is really important, but what are some of the things you guys are looking for in the budget?
Well, I'll start, if it's all right. I think what's important is when talking about the budget, and certainly it involves numbers, to remember what those numbers are for and who they're for. So we're talking about human beings. And so when it comes to the budget, and the proposed budget as of now is just about 181 million, a little bit over 181 million. So about a 5 million increase, or 2.8 increase from the year before, from last year. And so that it's pretty lean compared to how it has been before. And with our budget, the large bulk of it mostly oftentimes goes to salary and things along those lines, which is important, but also in responding to our special education needs. And that certainly is our right, and certainly what's important for us to do. So again, we're talking about numbers, but more importantly, we're talking about people and who they are applied to. We certainly know that ESSER funding has been has supported and facilitated in not a supplanting way, but a supplemental way in terms of the budget. However, those funds are going to soon not be available to us. So what has been important when it comes to the budget and attending to each line item is not creating a budget cliff or benefits cliff where we're putting money here, putting money there, but then oops, what are we going to do 3 years from now?
Right.
And so really have appreciated the efforts of the executive team in being mindful of that. And something that has really come to light, not in a new way, but being reminded way, is the importance of mental health and mental health needs of our young people. And
A
certainly,
lot of people speaking publicly at your meetings about mental health.
absolutely.
Yep.
And we want our budget to reflect how we're supporting, attending to that in an effective and proactive way. Because even though things may appear to be settling down, the aftermath of the pandemic will have some long extending presence known. But I'll pass it to my teammates to please share.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern is the special education needs, and how, as much as you can anticipate what they'll be, we don't know about all the kids turning 3 and how many will be from birth to 3 transitioning in. And with the pandemic, some of the identification of kids with learning issues, we weren't able to be as efficient as we normally could when everybody was in person in school. So there, can be an increase in identification and learning disabilities that just increase the amount of kids in who need special ed. And so there are some increases there. I think nationwide there's a real concern about the needs of our children that aren't atypical and how we meet those needs. But overall, all the budget information is online, it's available, and the increases seem reasonable.
To me, I tend to be a budget hawk. I've not gone through the BOE budget, but I tend to be a budget hawk in general, and it actually shocks me how little it's going up, really. I believe we're in a period of what I call an echo or a ripple effect of the baby boom. I think we're in another ripple of that. I believe enrollment is climbing currently,
No.
right? No, it's not. Okay, so we're on the downside of that?
I mean, West Hartford lost a bunch of students during the pandemic. They just didn't
Disappeared?
enroll, and they've kind of come back. Correct me if I'm wrong. They've come back this year.
Okay.
But as far as overall enrollment, we're not really quite there yet until our kids who were part of that big class of
Secondary baby boom.
1995,
Yeah.
born then.
Start to have
when
kids.
they start
So
having
we're
kids,
5 years
that's
away.
gonna
Yeah, 5 to 10 years away.
Projection is 154 less kids this year.
This year, okay.
Yeah.
But the other thing that strikes me, because, obviously West Hartford has long been a leader in special needs education. I mean, it's one of the reasons why we came to town and what we found appealing in town many years ago. But I look at just some of the basic costs, food, fuel, heating, busing going up. Credit to you guys for keeping it to, what'd you say, 2.8% increase. I think that's a pretty impressive job of managing the budget. Ethan, you haven't, any thoughts or comments on the budget?
No, my hope is that we can keep it there at 2.8. I'm concerned that there's a lot of unknowns in the economy, particularly with inflation.
Right.
Inflation in particular, I think I see it from where I work, where our prices of raw materials are going up, as well as shortages, and it's throughout the economy and the price of gas. So the reality is, at the end of the day, it's taxpayers who are paying this. So 2.8 seems like reasonable. I did send an email to Lorna, so she has a chance to look at it. When we do the budget, not for this year, but for next year, I'd like to see if we could do zero-based budgeting or look at that to understand what impacts what, because there's so many moving parts. But no, I hope we can stay at the 2.8. I think it's also great. It came out in the last meeting because of the ESSER funds. They're using it for the student athletic activity fees, which I think is important to let kids play. And there may be only one or a couple kids that don't do it because there's activity fees, and I realize I assume you can ask for a waiver, but people don't do it. So I think that's good that that's in there. And that's really, even if it's only for another 2 years, that's very positive.
Any big capital projects you want to talk about in the budget?
Well, you say capital, I'm thinking capital improvement,
Yeah.
and we know that that is something that we voted on in January, February, and a big part of that, as we know, was to replace our tennis courts.
Yep.
That was a big chunk. However, fortunately, what has passed is now the state will take that on, and so we're pleased for that, because again, there are tennis courts on the grounds of Connerton Hall, 24 total, 12 for each school, but it's open to the community as well, so everyone benefits from use of the tennis court. So with them being repaved and extending their longevity, that's a win-win for us all.
The capital plan is separate from the budget.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, some of the capital improvements, though, some of our oldest buildings over the next 2 summers will have the ventilation system upgraded and windows improved, so that's great. I think Duffy is nearing 70.
Duffy was the first one, right?
Duffy and Webster Hill, I believe, are the first 2
Yep.
schools that are having their ventilation
Right.
systems redone.
And that's a big expense, but it also has to be done during the summer when the kids aren't there. So there's going to be a lot of activity, I think, this summer in the different schools.
It's always impressed me how much they can get done in 8 or 10 weeks or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's quite impressive. So let's talk a little bit about a big loss the town is suffering. I think hopefully most everyone can agree that losing Tom Moore is a big deal. He's done a really incredible job in the school system since the late 1990s, and as superintendent since July of 2014. Talk a little bit, I know it's really early on, but talk a little bit about what the process is going to be, and Lauren, I'll direct this to you, in terms of, are we an executive search firm? Like, what's going to happen? How long will the process take? What role will all of you have in it?
Certainly, certainly, and yes, it is a loss to us. However, we are happy and proud of Mr. Moore and venturing on to do different things and leaving behind the great work that he has contributed. And so with that, efforts certainly are underway to see what is our next step, who will our next step be. So we had an executive session following our last meeting, and within that meeting, the outcome from that meeting, rather, we'll have updates to share at our next Board of Ed meeting. So that is the extent of what I can share from that piece, but do know that we want to certainly keep people abreast of what is happening and want to hear from others, and we'll have more to share at our next meeting.
Will the community be involved in help? Can they weigh in either through public comment, that sort of thing? Will they
Well,
be?
public comment is always available,
Right.
certainly at every meeting. With this specific task, we certainly want to hear from the community as well, because their children are going to be influenced direct communication with whomever that may be.
Ethan, any?
Well, my interaction with him, well, maybe Claire's was more because she's in the school system, but was relatively limited. But
Right.
I enjoyed it. I only heard good things about him from others as well. But he was very open and transparent, and so didn't have to agree with him or just but he told you what he thought, and then you could have the chance to come back. So that was always positive.
Claire, any?
Well, I had him as one of my students' fathers.
Right.
So that was great.
Right.
And he was very supportive of, my out-of-the-box ideas as a teacher. So I think he encourages innovation. I think I'll love the Midwest. I'm from the Midwest, so the Chicago area is lucky to have him. But I think 8 years is a good amount of time as a superintendent. I don't know what the standard amount of time is, but he felt the need, and kids were off to college.
We actually know the standard amount of time, if you
Is it,
remember.
What is
2.5
it?
years?
It's
Is
one
that-
and a half years. 18 months is the average shelf life
Really?
My.
of a superintendent, which is horribly shocking, or shockingly horrible.
Think about
All
the
of it.
Yeah, how do you get up to speed?
It's just, it's unreal. Yeah, we had Tom on a previous show, and we discussed it. When he said it, I almost fell out of my chair. So, yeah, that really stuck with me.
May I just say
Yeah.
something else, please, as
Yeah.
well, since it's on the floor, in terms of Tom's soon departure, and just hearing again the length of time that he has served the district, not only in general, but in his role as superintendent, compared to the average shelf life. And just want to, again, just express great appreciation for all that he has done. I have to say, with one of the things that I very much appreciate about Tom is that what he says, he does, and he means. And certainly the way that he has advocated for all of our children in the district, especially as it relates to equity, that is something that is admirable. And I think that he helped, his confidence and conviction in speaking in that way, helped to encourage others to do the same for all children. And so just wanted to say, greatly appreciate his efforts with that.
I was always, just as long as we're, talking about our memories with him, is how his ability to speak just off the cuff, extemporaneously, just incredible. He'd get up and make a 10 or 15-minute long speech with not a single prepared note. I mean, just
That's
brilliant,
authenticity.
brilliant guy.
Yep.
That's authenticity.
Yeah, sure is.
I did want to ask, and I know there's not much you can say about the process, but can you tell our viewers that, or are you able to say that by the time June comes around, we'll know at least what the process will be and whether or not there's going to be an interim? I assume that it's going to be difficult to name a new superintendent within the next 2 months or so. I assume we'll have an interim or acting superintendent in that role. Will we know by the time the board recesses for the summer?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
More details to that, again, not trying to be coy at all, but just want to respect our process and the intent of sharing more at our next regular Board of Ed meeting, and we'll certainly have additional information to share at that time.
So I've got a couple of I don't know, Ronnie, you've got some of the notes. Do you have other topics you want to hit on?
Oh, no, my notes were on,
Oh,
we're
okay.
talking about what people said tonight as reminders to myself.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, because Ronnie's got to take this, she writes a news story. She'll write a news story from this. So I guess I want to come back to public comment, but again, I'm trying to look forward, but I just want to touch on it because people it just constantly comes up, and I've got two written down, but I'll start with critical race theory. It is something that just kind of continuously comes up, and it's, to your point on the emails, on the letters, where they all effectively say the same thing. I was at a Board of Ed meeting a few months ago, and somebody got up and they used the word indoctrination. They used, all the little buzzwords we're seeing on some of the media that, maybe is not, I don't want to get too political here, but some of the media that maybe some folks might not believe at time, and it's, or maybe focusing more on entertainment than news. But how do we, I don't know, how do we overcome that? Because it's frustrating for me, and I'm not on the board, and you had one incredibly memorable exchange with a woman who, and you had this beautiful comeback where you told her we're all children of God, and it was an incredibly memorable moment for me watching it. But how do we diffuse an issue that really, I believe, is what I call a focus group issue, where somebody took these words, ran them by focus group, scared a bunch of older folks, and they don't really amount to anything at the K through 12 level. How do we get that word out? How do we educate folks to the fact that, this is not some sort of secret cabal, indoctrinating our kids? Is there an answer?
I think there are many, but I think to want to receive an answer, it depends on if the person wants to even receive an answer.
Right.
So if someone is saying something and asking questions or making statements, but open and receptive to learn from it and to possibly view it in a different way, that's where you can have productive, rational exchanges. Whereas if someone has their opinion, their views, and they're not willing to hear other pieces or to become enlightened, that's where it can become maybe not as engaging. And so first and foremost, in terms of critical race theory, it has been shared before, and we'll share it again. That is not something that we are teaching within the West Hartford Public School systems.
I'm going to stop you there. I'm going to ask you to repeat that.
Sure. In terms of critical race theory, that is not being taught within the West Hartford Public School system. And just to add a little bit of other additional insight, in terms of that level of education, that is something at the graduate school level, law school level. And so that even further enhances the fact that it's not taught within the West Hartford Public School system. But it's more than just saying that. I think it's why are some individuals so adamant in using that and saying that and the rationale that they may perceive for that. And that's a whole other conversation and a whole other level of discussion. I think what's important is that we remain focused on what is truth and what is accurately happening. And in that regard, we can certainly engage. And even if we get to a place of agreeing to disagree, but at least we're talking about truth points.
Ethan, I'll ask you, you're the Republican representative here.
But can I go back to something you said, and
Sure.
it's slightly different?
Yeah.
Because the comment you made was where everybody was saying the same thing, and I think that was something, because it goes back to, it was during the team names thing.
Right.
And that actual, where people were sort of close, was basically when you had the Conard football team input. And I was most impressed by their input. Now, some of the words may have been the same, but they were stressing the importance of the team and the camaraderie and how they built up. And that's why I was saying there's things in that came out that to me I was so impressed. I went to Tom and said, can I contact the coach just to say this is a great team, because it has nothing to do with the name Chieftains or not
Right.
Chieftains.
Right.
It was the group,
The group
camaraderie
working together.
Yeah, so that just sort of, I realize it wasn't meant that way, but that's just
Yeah,
sort of-
no, and Ethan, I totally get where you're coming from, because I'll get, occasionally I'll get an email, write your senator, write your congressman about XYZ issue, and it always gives suggested text, always. So for a coach to call a team together, if the team feels that they didn't want the team, and the coach said, hey, here are some ideas, yeah, I do get where you're coming from.
Some kids wrote a lot, some kids wrote very little.
Right.
But it all had sincerity to me.
Yeah.
The hall captain came and a freshman came, and also, these are kids. And I know, I'm pretty sure I would have struggled to do something like that if I was their age, even to write it, or just done like a half a sentence and say, I did what I was asked to do. My impression was they didn't want to do it, they didn't have to do it. He had no idea who was doing it, but it was just, the team came, and it was very powerful. And that's what I'm saying, even if you still are against those names, it was great to see
Right.
what the output was. There was some that came up relative to the whole, what is the there's various
Crit-
initials.
crit-
Not CIT.
critical race, yeah, critical
Yeah,
race,
critical race,
yeah, mhm.
but I think it's part of a broader. Again, I just think it's important people have the ability to input, and to Lorna's point, if it's not there, then it's not there. The books are out there. And there was one case where somebody brought up a book, showed the book at a meeting, and that book was taken away because people heard his point, or at least the administration heard his point. So I think, again, it's important to communicate. Not everybody can express themselves, and, I struggle sometimes to write. It takes me hours. But, I think it's good just to have community involvement in it. And I haven't seen people be negative. You will hear some people, and particularly the children of God, there was something else going on there. But
That was one of the more memorable nights. That was also the indoctrination night too. I think we had the same speaker. That speaker.
I was actually watching it on video because we had booked it. I was visiting my mother-in-law. I'd already booked the trip before I got put on the school board, but it was a strange conversation.
Yeah, it was
But I give Lorna credit.
interesting
It was a good
times.
comeback.
Yeah,
I realized it wasn't meant to be that, but.
It was definitely.
Hopefully
So Claire, your thoughts on this issue, overarching issue?
I think we do not teach critical race theory, but what we might have is a storybook about a family from another country moving next door, and how do the kids interact with someone that's new. As well, these are storybooks that prompt conversations, but a storybook about divorce doesn't make you get divorced.
Right.
And so these are conversations had in the classrooms about topics that the kids are already seeing, and they're exposed to by a friend or going to a friend's house and they have two moms. It's just conversation. So there's no direct instruction on these things. It's conversations for kids to help to understand the world that they live in. And, our fifth graders a couple years back voted for kid governor, a girl on an LGBTQ platform. And overwhelmingly, the kids in the state of Connecticut picked her as their kid governor. The other platforms were animals and Humane Society and recycling, and that's who they chose. So our kids are very open-minded. They see that they have friends that are different. They want to understand their world. But some of our other residents might not see that. They might not interact with people who are different and have, different backgrounds.
But I think that's why it's important to have transparency in conversations, and that's basically the only way you really going to change things.
Yep. I think also when you have, media being thrown at you, that's, whether it's political action groups or whatever. I mean, I got an email, I get a lot of junk email where they talked about how New York State is considering a bill that would allow post-birth, I have to not laugh when I say this, post-birth abortions up to 5 months after birth. I mean, that's just, now they've got one goal only. They want to shock you into raising money. They're telling a complete lie. They're taking an issue that is a painful personal decision for a woman or a couple and turning it into a money-making opportunity. And I think that's what's really wrong, but that's obviously a different conversation. So anyway, Ronnie, what do you?
It's not a Board of Education.
Yeah.
So we only have a couple minutes left. I think maybe we should get to the final topic that you have on your list here is masks.
Masks.
And that's something that the West Hartford Public Schools made masks optional in the schools. Do you have any feedback on how that's been going? Have more students, as time has gone on, moved away from wearing their masks? Any feedback on how it's kind of impacted the day?
I think observational feedback, as well as self-reported and others reporting. I think the first day, many still continued to wear their masks, and students and staff as well. And then it started to trickle down. And I think more and more now, many students are not wearing it. And I think that that says quite a lot. But what's important is that not only with many students choosing to not wear it or choosing to, there are still some that choose to, and they certainly have that right. We have not had an increase in cases. We have not had a surge. And so that's what's most important. Again, all of our decisions have been based on wanting to be safe and certainly wanting to follow the recommendation of our experts. So that's what we've been doing, and so far things are going well.
Yeah, I had heard that half of the administrators at Conard were wearing masks and half weren't, so that kids wouldn't feel pressured. And someone said, I think someone, the student rep said it was about 70-30, 70 without, 30 with. But my own daughter still wants to wear, and you know, her friends do, but then other kids don't. So I'm kind of surprised. In my own school that I teach in, I'd say 70% are without masks.
In their elementary school age?
Yeah, pre-K 3 to 5th grade.
The emails have stopped.
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
Yeah.
doesn't mean necessarily people aren't thinking about it, but I don't remember getting an email about it in the last several weeks.
It's even as they talk about this new BA2 variant, you know, I still track, I'm a nerd for it, I track the numbers every day, and Connecticut has been, you know, very close to flat now, you know, 335 to 400 cases a day now for weeks, and that would equate to what, 4 cases maybe a day in town or something. I mean, we're very fortunate that, you know, it sounds like,
Yeah,
you know,
it's
maybe,
fluctuated a little bit.
yeah, a little bit, yeah.
But it hasn't. I'm a numbers nerd too, and,
Yeah, right.
and I've been tracking it actually in West Hartford every single day from the time that.
You still?
I still do.
I'm just looking at statewide.
No, I still track it in West Hartford every day and have missed, you know, maybe 20 days over the last 2 years of not tracking the results. And it's, you know, it goes up a little bit. Like a couple days ago, it spiked slightly. And I'm talking like, instead of 3 cases, there were 8. But it's not, you know, not a statistically significant number.
So I'm being told from the production room that we have to end because we're ending early tonight because we got a UConn women's game tonight, which
That's
is
right.
pretty big
That's
game.
right.
So I know a lot of us want to go home and watch that game. So anyway, thank you all very, very much for coming in. It means a lot to get you into the show. Ronnie and I really appreciate it, and obviously the community. I think it's important to get the truth. Let me say the truth out, and I think all 3 of you really helped that, and I really appreciate it. Speaking for Ronnie, she appreciates it too. So,
Well,
Thank you very much. We really do appreciate your taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
so Claire, Ethan, and Lorna, thank you so much for coming on. For Ronnie Newton, I'm John Lyons, weha.com, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.